Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Blending Basics in Artist Loft Alcohol-Based Markers, Part 2. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is a continuation from a class we started last week, learning how to blend alcohol-based markers. So I'll review everything that we covered last week, but we're looking at some images of peach blossoms on a peach blossom tree and uh, sketched them, zoomed in, zoomed out, and then we talked about all the different colors that we're going to use to do some studies of these flowers. And then we discussed, well, I'm like reviewing already, even though I meant to like do that whenever we point it towards I'm going to point the camera towards my desk and I'll review everything we did. But anyway, we covered a lot of ground in last week's class, and tonight's class, we're going to put everything that we uh, discussed into play by doing kind of these final little studies. So last week was a lot of prep work for tonight's class. And then I will not be teaching a class next Wednesday, but I'll be back in March for a number of wonderful classes that I have planned. And oh yeah, some really fun value studies of flowers using graphite and pen and ink, and then a monochromatic gouache study of a little piece of wood. So just a nice little nature item study that we'll be using gouache to do that and talking all about blending gouache. So check out those classes, and you can sign up for those where you signed up for tonight's class on the Michaels website, or you can, well, I'll tell you a link in just a second you can go to. Okay, so don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes wherever you share your work online. And you can find me on the internet by going to my link tree, which has links to where to sign up for my next Michaels class. I have in-person classes that I teach here in Austin, Texas at the Contemporary Austin Art School at Laguna Gloria. It's quite the mouthful of a name, but beautiful museum and property in West Austin. And then I also teach small group classes out of my studio, and I do a number of online classes for myself independently. And I do private lessons, and I've had a lot of private lesson students lately that have been really rewarding. So check out all my links on my link tree if you're interested in seeing what else I have going on. All right, and then there's some of my artwork. You can also check that out. If you go to my link tree, I have prints and original artwork for sale. Okay, so Artist Loft alcohol-based markers. Let's review what we did last week. So the first thing we did was look at these reference photos that I provided in a PDF document. And we studied the light shapes, the value on those flowers, and we sketched them. Just got a lot of stuff on my desk here. So we sketched them in graphite, zoomed in, zoomed out, looking at some various shapes of light and contours and details on those images. And then we talked about the alcohol-based markers, and we did a number of little exercises here. First, we created a palette and talked about all the different markers that we're using and named them all. And then we combined some of the colors using the light color first and layering the darker color on top to get a new color and noticing how these markers blend. So we did some of that. And then right at the end of the class, we had started to do a little practice sheet here of blending those colors together and starting to create these contoured shapes. So that's where we left off. And in tonight's class, we're going to work towards creating this lovely little study like this. So just picking up where we left off, I was actually prepping my paper as we were waiting for the class to start here, and I got one more to fill in. So I'm aware that it's going to be hard to see my lines there in graphite, but that's why we spent all that time last week drawing them before, and I drew them nice and dark last week. So to get started here, we want to take our illustration pens, and I just realized I did not go over supplies. I'm like, we're in part 2, y'all know the supplies. So we've got that set of alcohol-based markers, and then we're using this Bristol Vellum Artist Loft illustration pad, and I was using an Artist Loft drawing pad and Artist Loft graphite pencils last week, but tonight we're just going to be using this illustration pad and the alcohol-based markers. But you are going to want a pencil to sketch if you have not done that already. So I'm just going to finish up doing my sketch, and my sketch is looking like this. So I know it's hard to see on the screen with that graphite, but I am just looking at the reference photos for the first one. We did that very zoomed in sketch of these particular blooms and kind of going off the screen like that a little bit and zoomed in on this part. So that was this sketch here. We looked at those contours. So the next one, we're zooming out on that same photograph and getting more of just a zoomed out version of this image and getting a lot of the blurry background in there. So I've got a lot of just blobby shapes and then that tree branch and just indicating where those flowers are going to be nice and light with your pencil so that the pencil lines don't show. I only drew dark for the sake of being seen on the zoom. And then we zoomed in on this particular photo of the peach blossom bloom that I already have a nice zoomed in version of the photo. So we really zoomed in and we're just looking at the very center of the blossom here and this very alien-like structure at the center of the flower. So we talked about all those different shapes and contours and sketched that out last week. And then this last little frame here, this last little thumbnail study, we're looking at this photo, which is the inverted version of this silver tone or this sepia image here. So you could look at the sepia one if that's easier for you, or you could look at this one. And we're just doing a study of the negative space, the light in between the little flower blooms. So whichever is easier for you to draw, and that's the last one that I'm gonna draw here. So you can either look at the positive space or the negative space, whichever one is easier for you. So that's the one I'm gonna finish up here using my nice light 2H pencil by Artist Loft. So it's nice and light. Not pressing down really hard on my pencil because I don't want those pencil lines to show too much. I just want them to be guidelines for myself. So this one is going to be a lot more of a little value study here. All of these could be considered value studies. Honestly, any kind of a drawing is going to be some kind of a value study because we can't see anything without light. The light's telling us everything we need to know when we're drawing. at least if we're drawing representationally, but we are leaving things open to interpretation in these sketches tonight. And by the way, I should review that I used a playing card to trace my little boxes here in last week's class. So that helped me get those nice little frames going. All right. So we've done all of our prep work here. We have studied our markers and how to blend them. We've studied the flowers, and then now we're going to start putting it all into action and blending them together. But as we go, if you're nervous about anything that we're doing along the way, you're worried about messing it up somehow, do a little test on your extra test sheet. But also when I say stuff like that, I don't want to like make anybody nervous because it's just art. And I like to always remind myself why I'm making art. What is the point of doing this? Actually, why don't y'all answer me in the chat? Tell me why you like drawing and why you like having an art practice. I'll tell you mine. Mine is to stop overthinking the things in my life, to concentrate on something that requires creative problem solving in a way that it keeps my brain really busy. I mean, I know all the neuroscience of what art does, and yeah, it helps me power down my nervous system, helps me relax. So I agree with Patty. It's relaxing. Pam says brings her joy to create. Emily helps relax me and helps me have some time to do something I enjoy. Bob says my art helps me relax and escape the hyped world. Erin says it takes my mind off of middle school. I love it. Sue says it's meditative. Share creating art helps me stay mindful, to keep learning new drawing skills. Says Barbara. Autumn says, I love drawing because I'm good at it. Art is for your own enjoyment. Oh, I could just keep reading these all night. I love it. Tina says to surprise themselves. I love it. Sandra connects me to the patterns in the world. Florence, time really flies when you're drawing. I love it. Yeah, so remind yourself of that whenever you're doing something new that might be challenging or frustrating, that you're doing this to relax. So if it's not relaxing, take some deep breaths, center yourself, get a little more mindful about those intentions. I like to remind myself of those things because it keeps me from taking what I'm doing too seriously or put too much pressure on myself to have a product. Okay, so, but now we're going to try to make a product. So looking at this first one here, we're zooming in on this image and noticing these colors. We've got this nice blurry background because I took the photo in portrait mode. And we've got this kind of glowy pink happening there, but I'm seeing a lot of gray in the background. I'm seeing some green, I'm seeing some brown. So I'm seeing a lot of those colors that we labeled here, the greens and browns, and that lavender purple. I think that's the lavender. It's B1. Oh no, wait. One is our pastel blue. Is gonna be handy a lot in the background here. And yeah, maybe the lavender. Whatever you want for the background is honestly fine. But I want to start with one of these lighter colors. And we're going to start with the background and we're going to work our way forward because we are essentially painting here. Anytime you have layering and you have blending, you are painting. And these alcohol-based markers really act like paint. This was the Seafoam, was the BG13 as well. So that one's the lightest, the Seafoam and the B1, the pastel blue, those are our lightest. And then the V5, the lavender is pretty light as well. So those are our lightest colors that we're going to start with here to start to build up our background values. And so I'm just going to grab that pastel blue. But before we get started here, I want to notice like how dark it is near the flower. So if we go really light with this color, and it's interesting how when you first put this color on, it can seem like a darker purple. But we talked about this last week, how that's why it's nice to make a little swatch because they look different in the caps look a little different from the color. The color looks a little different wet versus dry. So I'm using the brush side of the marker and I'm just starting to use a little one directional stripe or hatching line to start to fill in the background here. Maybe fill in some of the light that I'm seeing in that image near the flower, but not right up against it. But as I get closer to the flower, I'm going to start to layer in some gray. But I can go ahead and put, honestly, I could put a whole layer of this across the whole background and think of it as a bit of an undertone or an underpainting. So as I come up next to the lines of my little frame, I'll try to keep the shape of that frame going. And I'm just starting to layer these colors up. And actually, I'm going to switch to that seafoam color and start from the bottom here using the chisel tip a little bit, start to put in. And I just noticed my graphite was a little thick right there and it's kind of starting to bleed into the marker a little bit. So I'm just going to take my eraser and take off the top layer of the pencil. And you might want to do that too. It's a good idea so that your graphite doesn't get in the way. I know it's going to make my drawing even harder to see, but I don't necessarily want that happening. Okay, so I'm kind of just looking at the background and seeing all these blurry colors and trying to create the same sort of effect of this cool cloudy day in the background. So yeah, as that pastel blue is drying, it's really looking different than it did when it was wet. And then I'm going to take that neutral gray, or actually before I do that, I see a little bit of pink in the background there. Let me use that Peony, it's the R3. Get a little bit of pink in the background to kind of peek through that gray. It's probably enough. So we're about to put a bunch of pink on the flowers themselves. And then we'll start to layer that neutral gray in there. And that's the N6, the neutral gray. And I'm going to use little stippling dots for this. The last time I did use hatching lines and I felt like the hatching lines got away from me rather quickly somehow. And I think stippling it in might be a little better because I can take it slow and easy and be mindful of how overpowering that gray can be, and also maybe let it fade out in a way that feels like the background. So we're not going to be able to capture, I mean, maybe you will be if you're able to capture something that feels photorealistic in this background, more power to you. But I'm always just trying to get as close as I can to the effect that I'm seeing in certain visual phenomenons. And sometimes, honestly, it's quite accidental. You just try to create a cool effect, and maybe you get lucky and it looks photorealistic. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think little stippling dots is a good way to control this darker color. And the reason that we want this darker color next to our flower bloom is because it's going to create this pop in contrast from light to dark. We can't have light without the dark, right? So if we left the background all light, then this light flower wouldn't come forward. And also it does get quite dark behind the flower in the photograph. So letting our colors get this dark and then having those other colors peeking through will help us achieve some kind of depth. So actually, maybe let me pause here and put kind of left out this area. Get a little light blue, I already forgot what it's called, pastel blue. So whatever color you prefer to be peeking through in the background, that's the color you want to layer down first. A lighter color like this is a good idea. And I just kind of messed up my little frame there. I'm gonna try to clean it up.
Adrian, quick question.
Yeah.
Emily's wondering, well, she's using a different type of marker and they're not really blending that great. Do you have any tips for any blending with markers that are a bit darker and don't blend so well?
Uh, yeah, you can maybe try just going really slowly with them, one line at a time, and definitely still let them dry before you go on top of them with a different color. So I'm not sure what kind of markers you have, but even just like your basic uh, Crayola markers, if you layer them when they're wet, I don't know, just give them a minute to dry and see what happens. Maybe that can help, or try just using these little stippling dots like I'm doing. That way you're not really layering them too much. That might help. Hope that was helpful. And I will be honest, this class, when I was planning it, there was a lot of creative problem solving happening on my end as far as uh the blending. Well, the blending of the markers isn't the issue. I think just layering them, letting them dry, working from the background towards the foreground is the way to go. But I did maybe not plan what I was going to do so well. Like I just went for it. And so then I had to do quite a bit of creative problem solving in that was like, oh, that's not what I meant to do. How can I make that look more intentional? So this time I'm having a little more forethought about what's happening here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop with that gray for now. Just you can put as much or as little of that gray as you want in there. I definitely put way more of it the last time. And like I said, I think I just got a little carried away with those hatching marks and then ended up putting them in more than I meant to. So then I kind of did some troubleshooting there and added the white gel pen on top to create a little more contrast. And I'll talk about how I did that in just a moment. But I'm gonna switch to this hazelnut color E6 and get a little bit of this brown and green in here in the background. And I know this green and brown moment isn't actually right here, but I'm just gonna put one in, maybe two of them, just to create some areas of interest. And then I'm also gonna take my looking for my E17, that's my praline color, and put in some light little praline color wherever you think it might be kind of nice in that background, just starting to create this blurry background effect. Okay. Then the BG7 is the mantis green. So a tiny bit of that here and there. All right, and since we have something on the background, we can go ahead and leave that alone for now. I like to bounce around and go back and forth between the background and the foreground, but I never want to leave the background alone for too long, because then definitely when we're blending like this, it's easier to layer things. It's easier to fix mistakes in the background using the foreground. So if we did the foreground first, it might be kind of hard to fix any accidental bleed over moments into the foreground. Okay, I said I was going to move on from the background, and then I realized I had a big blank spot right there. So I'm going to resolve that moment real quick, and then I'll move on to the foreground.
Pam's wondering if you can put the original that you have there on your right a little bit. There you go. That way they can kind of compare where
Okay, yeah,
you are.
see where I'm going.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm doing it a little different. I'm not letting all that gray take over quite as much, but I still want it to be nice and gray near the flower so I get that same high contrast. I liked all these light colors in the background, and I didn't mean to cover them all up. But you'll know how it goes. You get carried away. Like even right now, I'm kind of like, it is pretty dark back there, and I want it dark all along the edge of these flowers, because I need these flowers to come forward. We need that darkness behind them to make them come forward. And with blending like this, with blending a darker color on a lighter color, it's easy to accidentally make a mark that feels really dominant. And so then you're trying to blend that out. So by having these little stippling dots that fade out, I'm letting that create blending into the background, make it feel nice and natural. Whereas those hatching lines had to keep going a little bit in order to make them feel like they were naturally stopping somewhere. Okay. I see somebody talking about Copic markers in the chat. So yeah, the Artist Loft alcohol-based markers are the uh, very affordable version of those Copic markers. It's the same sort of thing. All right, so now let's start to get some of these light pinks going. And I talked last week about how we really want a color like our Y14 or YR14, it's the powder, or the YR5 as our base color for our pink, because our pinks can be just a little dominant on their own, and we want this really soft pink to happen. So we're going to start with our YR14, or you could maybe use the YR5. It's very similar. And notice all the areas of really light pink. We're going to go in with this Caucasian flesh tone color here, this peachy color. And just curving around with the contours of the peach blossom, noticing all the places where it's nice and light. You could honestly do this color across the whole flower and it would be fine, because we're going to layer so many dark colors on top of it in some places, some darker pinks. But really we just need it along the edge, all those places where the light's hitting and we've got that lighter pink happening. And also over here where it's nice and light pink. And these other blossoms. Just following the contours. And I should mention, even though we're 35 minutes into the class right now, 2 of these are going to go much faster. This one and this one take more time, but these 2 are going to go pretty fast. So if anybody's watching the clock and wondering about that.
We have a couple folks asking if there's any way you can zoom into the one that you're working on for just a second, just to see how you did your dotting there.
Okay. Can hold it up a little closer to the camera too. Try to let it focus a little more. That's as good as it gets. So yeah, I'm just one dot at a time. So that's called stippling. And I've had a number of classes on pen and ink shading techniques, hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and scribbling. And if that's new to you, you might search in that playlist that Rich shared with you for classes on stippling, or search on YouTube and maybe you'll find some of my classes or someone else's classes on that topic. That could be really useful. All right, so we got that powder color in there. Now we're going to go in with our R3, that peony. That's our lightest pink. But actually, there's one more place I wanted to put the powder, is in the place where we're going to add that lavender purple in there. Actually, maybe we don't need this here, but it's not going to hurt. The darker colors are really going to overpower the lighter colors, or if they're, it's all about transparency, how these colors are going to blend. If they are more transparent, then they're going to create more of a blend, like we talked about last week, like they're going to create a new color. And if they are extremely dominant, then they are just going to overtake the color underneath, like that gray kind of overtook all those lighter colors, right? But then we're seeing how some of these other colors are showing through and blending more like this. Okay. So just like with painting, white, titanium white paint is usually your most opaque paint. Even though it's the absence of color, it can often cover up a lot of other colors. Okay, so going in with this pink now and layering it on top, and it's going to look different wet versus dry, and it's maybe not going to match that color perfectly that we're looking for there, but it's still going to be a lighter pink than the darker pinks we're going to add. Oh, kind of going off screen a little bit there. So just following those contours. You can always practice over on your practice paper if it's not turning out the way you want it. See what you might do differently. Okay, and then we'll start to go a little darker. Maybe actually we'll use this peony in some places by itself. And then we'll layer our darker colors in there, but that's kind of making it hard to see my pencil lines when I do that. That's probably enough. Okay, let's do the R6 next. Just slowly increasing the intensity of our pinks. I'm just noticing where it gets darker inside of that bloom, following those contours. Now that I'm coming up against the background, I'm trying to clean up some of those edges, but I also have another trick. Speaking of white being so opaque, we're going to use that white gel pen to maybe clean up some edges that might get wonky in this process. I'm just trying to create that center of a rose effect, the illusion of the center of this bloom spiraling out here. Okay, and then I'll use a darker, deeper red like my R12 or R19 or R18. They're all pretty dark red here. Switch to the R19. That one was a little too something for me. I'm really trying to create some depth in between these overlapping petals here. So in the darker spaces, really layering these darker reds. And I'm not going for photorealism here. I'm going for like the effect of this flower. So close enough is good in my book. Okay, and then let's do the same thing on these. Actually, let's work on the stem next. So I'm gonna go light to dark with these colors and maybe even use our powder color. No, I'm not gonna use the powder color. I'm gonna use that seafoam color for this light green that I'm seeing at the edge of the stem. And then and you can leave some of this blank paper here. I'm going to use that praline color again. That E6 or maybe E17. Where's that one? Yeah, praline. So for the highlight on the stem, I'm just going to pay attention and leave some blank paper. I'm just very gently adding some of this praline color along those contours that we spent so much time talking about last week. And then I'll layer in that BG7, the mantis green. And so by layering these colors and letting them interact with each other, I'm creating blended effects. I'm creating depth and dimension, something that could easily feel flat. And then now I'm using the just green, the BG8, to add another dimension to that green. And then I'm looking for my coffee color E18. And if I'm going too fast, there will be a recording of the class that you can watch tomorrow and pause and play back and all that. I do want to get to these other ones here before too long. So just layering in that coffee color, noticing those little dark moments on the stem that stick out. Really going for the details in these contours here. And you can see how it's really giving the effect of blending with paint almost in a way. Okay, and then our neutral gray will be the last color we'll use on the stem. We'll really drive home the contrast between dark and light that we're seeing here. Create that shadow on one side of the stem that is so different from that highlight. And we definitely need some of these little sticky outy moments to make it feel a little more realistic. So even though we're using a lot of colors, we're using all of those colors very minimally there. And then I could even use my coffee color in the center of this bloom up here to push that dark center a little more. And maybe even a couple of moments here to create a little more depth. I'm just going to quickly do that same sort of stuff to these other flowers and try to go a little faster. We want that purple in the middle, that lavender. It's the V5, lavender. A little too fast and went outside of my little frame. I'm just following those contours, trying to keep everything nice and soft. Not really going over the same area twice too much until it dries. That way I can see how the markers kind of bleed onto themselves in a way that tells me how much more color I actually need. You can't really judge it while it's wet, so give it a second to dry. It dries pretty fast. Coral reef is the next color. This bloom feels pretty dark to me, so I'm going to use quite a bit of that coral reef color. I'm definitely using a bit of a brush stroke mark here, like I'm using a paintbrush to sweep over these areas. Ooh, I just went onto the stem a little bit, but that's okay. That's what our white gel pen is for, is to clean up those little accidental moments. Let's see what else. I'm gonna use my Did I not use this color on our palette? The R9, the magenta? I don't have it listed there. I'm going to try the R9, the magenta, see what that does. I think, oh yeah. Sorry, folks. I had it out, but for some reason I didn't demonstrate it last week, but that is another nice color to create some contrast at the center of the blooms. Might even add a little bit of that up here too. It feels a little more like a red violet. But when we layer it on with those other colors, the garnet is good too. It creates the same sort of effect. But yeah, just using one of these colors by itself is not going to give us the same effect as stacking and layering them from dark to light like this. Maybe I'll stipple here in the middle with that garnet and some gray. It's pretty dark in the center of that bloom. All right, so now we're starting to see that visual pop is happening in this one. Okay, so yeah, you can keep adding your gray to the background if you want to extend that out a little more, or whatever you want to do to make that background feel a little more complete. Like I feel like this area needs more gray because the flower's getting a little confused with the background there. So that'll help the flower come forward even more to push that gray. And then I'll show you what I did with the white gel pen. So I used that to try to get this little glowy effect to happen here at the edge of the flowers. And my gel pen is a little stuck here. Hang on. So I wanted that pink to really glow. I'm like, well, maybe I'll just outline this flower in white to create that glowing effect. So that really helped. And it'll just clean up some of those lines that maybe got a little wonky while you were working. And then I'm a big fan of the idea of like fairy sparkles. So you gotta like go on top of that gray and do a little white dot. And the more gray, the more this will stand out. Like you can see how much those little sparkle dots stood out because I went so solid gray. So that's the benefit of going that dark gray. And then if you go that dark and you think it's too dark, I'm usually not a big fan of using my finger to blend, but if I draw a circle with the white gel pen and then fill it in with like some one directional hatching lines and then just rub it a little bit with my finger, it kind of creates a little transparent blob there. So that's how I did that little like the glowy light orbs in the background. So you could add some of those. Let's do those right here. But I would probably want to add more of that gray before I do it so they stand out against the gray, because right now they're not going to stand out too much. And then you could definitely add a little dot in the center of the flower if that floats your boat. All right. Well, let's move on to this one. This is the next most time-consuming one, and I am very aware of the time now. That took a lot longer than I meant for it to. Okay, so we're going to start with the powder color again. Maybe we might not get to this fourth one, but I will definitely talk about ways to get started with it at least. Powder, sneak off too. Here it is. Okay, so with this one, this is last week we talked all about those contours. That's where this is really going to come into play, and I'll have that other example right there on the screen at the same time for us. So we really want to follow the contours that we're seeing in the center of this bloom, and they radiate out. Well, we're really zoomed in here, so we're really just looking at this frame here. So we want to get that light pink going. So we're looking for some triangular teardrop shapes that radiate out in all directions, sort of like that, but stacked on top of each other. Very Georgia O'Keeffe-esque, what we're going for here. So just radiating out with that powder, because this is where we want to stack that light pink. And if you accidentally sketch over, actually, I think we should just go ahead and sketch over our pencil lines. Maybe take your eraser and erase those pencil lines too. We don't really need them, but if the marker goes on top of them first, it's kind of, it is, you can't erase them if you already drew on them with marker. So it is good to erase that ahead of time. We can put those back in with the white gel pen. So I'm not worried about going over those, but if you did want to leave it blank paper, if you didn't have a white gel pen, that would be a good idea. And then also these little tendrils that stick out, those are also going to be very light pink. So mainly you want to be thinking about the light pink right now, where all the light pink is going to go, and be mindful of that, because if you accidentally color over that with the dark pink, it's going to be hard to bring those light moments back out. So really it's just, we want that light pink to be a few different triangles, but I'm just going to go ahead and do this action so that you can start to see where it's going. And there's a few really big petals that go almost to the edge. I'm going to draw those in right now. That way I can have those, the light pink standing out in some moments. But as I said before, this color can easily be covered up. So you could do this all across the whole thing if you wanted. Okay, and then take that Leone pink, and if there's any spot where you're like, oh, I should have done the powder first, you can always stop and add it back in. But I am being really mindful of where that light pink actually is going to be now. So start to draw in some of those moments where the light pink parts of the petals are in the photograph. And then definitely go over those little, I'm calling them tendrils. But we can add things back in with the gel pen. So if it gets too dark and you need to add more of those, that's the way we'll do that. Because they can be white or they can be light pink. I ended up adding white to all of them. So this is where we're really seeing that blending in action. Because if you do that sweeping movement where you let the colors fade out into each other, you really get this fun little ombre action to happen. It's gradient effect. Okay, and then now that we've established that pink, I want to put that powder color on that center moment there, but I was afraid it would get a little lost in that all that powder before, so I wanted to get the pink in there a little bit first. And it's actually going to be very dark next to this. We're going to go in with all those other reds and pinks, but layering the colors is so essential to creating the depth that we're going for here. So if we just went straight to the center with the red, we wouldn't get that same, wouldn't get the same effect. So it's going to get rather dark here now as we start to build up those other colors. Do the coral reef next. Start out slow and notice that big dark area radiating out from the center. We'll establish the center area, then we'll fill out the rest of it with those pinks again. We really will end up with the light pink almost everywhere in this little study, but I'm going to create the optical illusion here in the center first. Otherwise, it would just feel like we're just filling it all in light pink. So really covered up my pencil lines now. I have to look more at the photograph to rely on where I'm going. I can't see my pencil lines quite as much anymore, if at all. And yeah, if you hit any moments where you're like, oh, I need more peony pink under there before I start blending that. That's what's happening to me. And I want more of the powder color too. Way more light pink in this than it seems like. This powder and the light pink are the glue that's holding these flowers together. I'm trying to keep my lines radiating out from that center so I can keep that optical illusion going. If you start to fill it in more, just like every which way, just come back to, if you have to do that in certain places to get into certain corners, I understand, but then try to come back to that motion of radiating out from the center. It feels like it's too much of this color, but it's really not because this color helps that pink. not be too something too pink. Starting to develop now. Starting to see where it's going. And I do notice when you use the same color too much, it does start to feel like it's drying out a little bit with these markers. But if you put the lid on them for a minute and just wait a minute, they come back. So it's just so much of the use of the same color there. So I'm just gonna set that one down and maybe work on this dark center a little bit more here. So I want to layer in more of those reds, even though my instinct is to go straight for the garnet. Let me use that R18 or maybe the R12, the poppy red. And when we get that poppy red layered on top of all these other colors, it doesn't quite stand out the way it would on its own.
Pam's wondering, do you ever use the colorless marker to erase mistakes or blend the colors more?
Yeah, you could certainly do that. I feel like that's like the last thing that you want to do if you really want to get that like watercolor effect. Like let's actually use it a little bit here and see. This would be a good place to use it because we are really looking for these colors to really blur together here and soften. So yeah, that could be helpful here, but it's going to soften it quite a bit and just make uh, everything bleed a little more. And then we're going to get rid of that like crisp line that we might have had there. So I'm not going to use it too much, but you could definitely use it if you feel like that's helping you. But I really like how layering the colors and letting them kind of stand out crisp against each other feels. So, um, I feel like I say this so much. It's a like a broken record statement, but it's something to tell people because a lot of people don't think about this and don't realize this, but it's one of those kind of obvious things that we need to maybe have repeated to us sometimes. All colors, all any type of art medium that you're using is pigment plus a binder. So, acrylic paint is pigment plus a polymer based binder. Oil paint is linseed oil is your binder. With these alcohol based markers, you guessed it, it's alcohol. So that's your colorless blender here is basically just the binders. There's no pigment. So it's just doing what the markers naturally do, but without pigment. So if you keep going over the same spot over and over again with the same marker, it's going to eventually just get really wet, right? So use it sparingly is my advice. Okay. That's one of those, like, I'm the only person who's always hearing myself say that in my own head in every class because a lot of people need to hear that. Well, I say it a lot. Okay, what color is next? Let's use our R18. Where to go? Was my one that the name rubbed off, but I think it was crimson. last week. Someone said it in the chat. Yeah, this one's kind of similar to the poppy red, but still a little different. What are we doing on time? 7:07. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this one up pretty soon here. So we're just gonna keep layering. I have not added that lavender yet. The V5, the lavender. Let me get some of that in there. That color is another color that really blends things together. So yeah, that would be my advice before you reach for that colorless blender. Figure out what color is like will act as a binding agent as just a color, because this lavender color, it really fuses all these other colors together and gives us an effect that is really nice. So that pastel blue is another one, that seafoam green. All of these light transparent colors can really be used to fuse and bind things with a color, not just with that blender. Okay, and then the garnet is what's really going to create that depth here in the center. So I just wanted to build up those other colors, because if I went straight for the garnet, it wouldn't have the same impact. Using that stippling effect again, but also kind of hatching and radiating out as well. And then to really drive that depth home, we're going to use the brown a little bit, coffee color, or you could even use your neutral gray a little bit, but I think the coffee color works. And I'm stippling with that as well. And I know I didn't finish out all that light pink because my light pink was getting a little dry, so I set it aside, but we'll pretend I filled in all the rest of this with light pink. Actually, let's do a little bit more because I want to make that. I need something for my white to stand out against when I add that gel pen. Oh yeah, it came back a little bit. Probably if I let it sit there a few more minutes, it would regenerate itself a little more fully. Okay, y'all get the idea. All right, so then we take our white gel pen, make the magic happen. That's my gel pen that doesn't work as well. And I left that white there at the top. And that definitely, you could have done that with all of these. You could have left your paper showing through right here, but just doing a little white gel pen to make those little nodes happen. Able to draw those. Did not look up the flower part names again. But whatever these things are called, these little tendrils, they're quite delicate. Very dainty and delicate. I'm a very sensitive person, and I often tell my friends and family, I'm just a delicate flower. Because I am. Bet a lot of you agree. We're all just delicate flowers. Be gentle with ourselves and each other. Okay, That's pretty good. Wow, we are really running out of time, but this one's gonna go fast. And I love this background effect. So we're gonna use our lavender and that pastel blue. And this time we're gonna use the chisel tip to create this fun effect over here. So we're going to be looking for a very painterly watercolor type effect with like some visible brush strokes with the chisel tip here. So I'm going to think about a diagonal line, and maybe actually let me demonstrate this over here so anybody who's nervous about it can see what I'm about to do. So I'm just going to do like diagonal lines with the chisel side and try to get them to layer on top of each other like that. And this just, something about this just reminds me of like artwork in a nail salon. I was talking about nail polish colors last week too. It's all the names of these markers. It just makes me think about getting my nails done. All right, so yeah, we're stacking those on top, and then I'm just gonna do that all the way around and leave the little flower blossoms alone and leave any weird gaps that are happening. Just don't even worry about that. Don't even worry about those. We'll get to those in a second. We'll just fill this all in, keep this action going, because I find when you're trying to do a repetitive mark like this to use momentum to keep it consistent. Like if you stop and start again, it kind of breaks the consistency of the marks all going in the same direction here. It gives us this kind of like beveled mirror or like a weird mirror effect. I like it. I don't know what to call it, but I like it. Okay, so we'll do that all the way across. Then we'll take our brush side and clean up all those little weird moments. And it might seem like that's going to create like a weird stripe, but it's going to dry and it's not going to show as much, I promise. Because I did it the same way here. And I don't think you can tell where it dried. Try to get that one on the screen for us. Same time. There we go. And if you feel like you can see a stripe, then you can always do another layer in those moments using that chisel tip motion to easily blend out any weird moments like that. So right now I'm just filling them in with the brush tip. But then I can go back in with the chisel tip and do a little bit more of that to like ease the transitional moments where it feels like it got a little wonky. And then that'll dry and I think feel pretty natural like it does over here. Okay, and then let's use our lavender. And you could even go back in with the lavender if you wanted to do the chisel tip side again and create more a different color with the pastel blue and the lavender together. That could create a fun effect and make it a little darker and really kind of push that hazy how to describe it, but it's like, you'll know what I'm talking about, like that lens blur situation. Okay, so let's use our lavender here on the flowers. Because remember, we had all that lavender and this was the flower we just zoomed in on. So I'll go ahead. I zoomed in a little more on this one when I sketched it than in the other one for some reason. Oh, we're just making these nice and loose. It's more the visual effect of the flowers at a distance. So these can just be very blob-like. Oh, and I should have erased more of my pencil here. It is bleeding, and now I can't erase it. Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna fill it in more with a powder to go over it with that light pink. And just filling in all these little blobbies. I definitely did not mean to zoom in so much on this, and I really should have erased my pencil lines. But the way that I handled the little stem on this one was, let me hold that up closer to the camera. I just did one little line of the praline, one little line of the green, and one little line of the coffee brown. And I left it really loose and implied there. So I'm going to try to do the same thing here, even though I zoomed in on it a little more. So the praline, I'm just going to extend that praline out a little more. And then actually, since I gave myself more space, maybe I'll do the mantis green there a little more. And then the coffee, I'm just going to let it be really loose and implied. Just a suggestion of that stem. Start to layer in those other colors. So these, you can just kind of swirl it around or even just fill in that entire area. Maybe I'll even use the chisel tip since that side has been overworked so much tonight on the brush side of my peony. Got to put the powder down first right here so you can definitely see how this pink looks more by itself. Been trying not to just color things in solid all the way across, but that's kind of what I'm doing right now because we're gonna just fill it in. And we don't need too much detail on these since they're so far away. And then to create that contrast and that depth, we want our dark garnet color or maybe our coffee brown in the center. But actually, let's go layer a bit more with our reds. Do that coral reef next. Because otherwise, it's just not going to feel like we want it to feel. I'm trying to cut corners, but I don't want to cut too many corners. Yeah, that's looking good. I feel like I have such the benefit uh having my screen up on the Zoom because I can look at the Zoom to get a sense of what this feels like from a distance. And if you are feeling like yours looks bad or wrong or whatever negative word you're assigning it, put it across the room or get a few feet away from it and look at it from a distance and you'll probably see it differently. When you're right up on things, sometimes it's easy to judge them really harshly. Also, I just noticed I did put a little bit of that seafoam green color there in the background too, and I left that out with this one, but I think it's still looking pretty nice. Okay, so then we'll get that garnet in the center there. And this is where I really wish I had erased my pencil lines better because they're showing through. I'm just gonna do one little dot of garnet on some of these. And use our white gel pen to give it some more character. Maybe draw those little things in right here again. Or just add some fun little accents, maybe cover up your pencil lines. There are lots of things that we can do with this white gel pen. Or just do those fun little sparkle dots. Okay, we did not get to this last one, but honestly, that was the one that I wasn't super happy with when I worked on this the first time around, and I talked about it in last week's class how it was supposed to be just a light study of light and dark, but it got away from me and I demonstrated how well you can really layer. I ended up going over the entire thing with garnet and then using my white gel pen to bring back those blobby shapes. So that one is going to just be a choose your own adventure kind of one. If you want to, I would advise, since if I had more time to do that one over again, what I wanted to do differently was assign the peony and the powder color to the negative space, to the light. And then, so maybe let me just get started with that, what I wanted to do. I thought just fill in all of the light with this light pink and then use those dark reds and pinks to fill in uh, the dark values. And then add the white gel pen on top just to add some accent. So I just wanted this one to be a fun little more abstracted study of that image. I think the more you study an image and understand it, the better off you are. And doing this is fun because we don't have to worry about going outside of the lines because we're just going to cover it all up with the darker color. Do that pink over all of that. See, how many minutes do we have left here? 4 minutes. Rich, do you mind if we go a couple minutes over?
No, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, let me see if I can get this one finished kind of quickly here. That peony pink has really been stretched tonight. Okay, so and then my idea was to go over this background with like those darker colors, like the coral reef, and we could do that same sort of effect that we did up there on the other one. But I'm just filling in all these big spaces with the chisel side, and then I'll go back and use my brush tip to fill in the smaller spaces. And then do that all over again with the garnet. So then all the dark, I'm just going to do one small area here to see the effect that would create. So right now, they're all kind of feeling like the same value or pretty close to the same value. But whenever I add the garnet in, that's going to really push the dark shapes. Will really start to feel more like a study of the light in this image. So if I did this whole thing like that and all this negative or positive space, whatever you want to call it, this is all the darker values is what I'm adding the dark to in that uh, black and white image, or looking at yeah, the black and white or the sepia version of this image. And that's just kind of lumping all the dark together and all the light together. But then you're going to get that sort of effect. And then you can add the white gel pen on top. You could add some of those fun little bubbles, those little orbs. You really want to wait for the color to dry first, but you'll get the idea. Okay, so that was my plan for this fourth one that was going to end up looking different than this one, but probably better, but we didn't get to finish it. So that's okay. We covered a lot here. It was a lot. I would love to see some of y'all's examples before we end the class. I'm sure some people had to run off already since it's already 7:30, but if you want to hold up your little studies here and we can spotlight you. Oh, look at that autumn. That is gorgeous. Wow. You did a little more zoomed out on that one bloom, but it's beautiful. You handled that so well. I love how your grays fade in and out in the background. Wonderful. All right, this is Barbara. Yes, Barbara, look at all those colors blending together. That's beautiful. You're really selling it. Oh yeah, and then those are coming along. Oh yeah, I see you use that seafoam green a little more in the background. Yeah, it really gives it that, what is that effect? That blurry, out of focus effect. Really lovely. And this is Patty. Oh yes, Patty, look at that. That zoomed in bloom, beautiful. Oh yeah, that feels, these feel like children's book illustrations. You all did some gorgeous work, and this is Juan. Oh hey, it's Juan. I didn't see your face, so there you are. Nice to see you. Beautiful, yeah. Gorgeous work, Juan. Always nice to see you. Oh, I love how you went for it with all the dark gray, and that really got a mood. It's very moody. And then the bottom right one is very Van Gogh-ish, very painterly. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's Laura. Hi, Laura. Nice to see you. Oh, those are gorgeous. Oh, you really do well with these markers. That is so beautiful. I just love the blending and layering effect that you're getting with those dark pinks over the light pink. And that gray is just, yeah, those are so delicate. You really captured the delicate nature of those flowers. Wonderful. All right, this is Sandra. Also very beautiful. Oh, I love the stylized quality of all of those. Again, it feels like children's book illustrations. Y'all should start illustrating your children's books now. I would buy them I'm on board. All right, Patty stuck with the graphite. I love it. Really noticing those contours and blending them out. So gorgeous. Oh, I just love to see people just using whatever you got and just studying these flowers with us. Gorgeous. Oh my God. Y'all make me so happy. This was so wonderful. Just love seeing your work at the end of these classes. It makes it also worth it. And thank you, Rich, for being such a great moderator and going over a few minutes with us. And looking forward to seeing you all in March for more flower studies. Lots, all the flowers. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you.